We have enough questions here to last until after the last exit poll of the year 2000. The first one, given that we have students in the audience, I always preferred to give to a student. A ninth grade student at Alice Deal Junior High School in Washington, D.C. asks, in what ways would you help me and students in general to improve our education?
Well, I think the most important thing that I would seek to do is put the control of that education back in the hands of your parents, who ought to have the first responsibility for deciding where you go to school and what faith and values and aspirations are reflected in the substance of what that school offers. I believe that we have made a great error in the course of the last 40 and 50 years in America, allowing education to be dominated by professional educrats and government bureaucrats. It is the parents who stand before God with the first responsibility for their children, and we ought to rely on their sense of that responsibility and their love for their offspring in order to assure quality in education. But that also means, of course, that they have to be empowered in order to make the choices that can reflect that sense of responsibility. That's why I'm a strong supporter of school choice, the idea that the money we spend on education ought to follow the choice of parents, not the choice of educrats and bureaucrats and politicians. Once we have followed that road, I think we will reestablish the connection that ought to exist between home and school and faith. If a child is to go to school in a cohesive environment that helps to build both character and knowledge. That connection has been broken in our present system, and I do not believe we will see a real restoration of both security and quality in all our schools until it has been restored.
I'd like to lump together a large number of hypothetical questions that came up, which all started, if you don't get the Republican nomination, would you accept the nomination for vice president? Would you endorse whoever the Republican Party nominated? Would you endorse a candidate who had a pro-choice vice president? Or what role would you like to play in a future Republican administration?
Well, people say that I very often answer questions by questioning the premise of the question. I would certainly question the premise of that question, since we are in the midst of a primary season to determine that very fact. So I don't have to contemplate choices about vice president. I do have to say this, though, because I think it is important to make clear my position, and also I feel it incumbent on me now. I have said repeatedly, and I will say again here, that if the Republican Party abandons the moral principles that are its heart, if it abandons the pro-life plank, if it puts some pro-abortion candidate on its ticket, then of course I will not abandon my principles in order to keep some partisan labor. The parties are to serve certain purposes. I know that for some they're just coalitions meant to obtain power, because that's what they were taught in Yale someplace. But I do not believe, in fact, that that is the decent purpose of politics. The decent purpose of politics ought to be to do our business as citizens. That is to say, to do what is best for our country. So if I think the party has abandoned its moral heart and with it the moral identity of our people, I could not stay in the party. If it chose a pro-abortion nominee, if it chose a pro-abortion vice president, if it gets rid of the pro-life plank, it will leave me. I will not leave it. But I will certainly not follow it down the road that leads to America's perdition. Step number one. The logic of that in terms of the present field of candidates means this. There is one candidate whom, as I just pointed out, whatever his record, I know there are these phonies like to stand on their record like Al Gore did for a long time, convincing pro-life voters to cast their vote for somebody who in his heart was not pro-life. I will say unequivocally, in his heart, John McCain's not pro-life. Alan, how can you profess to believe? Yeah, I can't see into somebody's heart. No, I can hear what he says to his children, though. And unless he is some kind of unnatural parent, what we say to our children reflects the deep-seated convictions of our heart. And if he's going to give a pro-abortion, pro-choice answer to his daughter, he has given that answer to the rest of the country. And that being the case, the logic is very clear. I will never again cast my vote consciously and knowingly for anyone who betrays the fundamental moral principles without which neither I nor any of my forebears would have obtained their freedom. And that ought to be pretty clear in terms of what happens to Alan Keyes in the event of a John McCain candidacy. He is not, and I say this for the benefit of any pro-life people out there, there are a few who look to me occasionally to see what I think. I'll tell you right now what I think about that. John McCain is not pro-life. Anyone who votes for John McCain betrays the pro-life cause.
Now, we don't identify our questioners here, but I just have to say this woman got up this morning at 4 a.m. in Nashville, and she also says even though she's from Tennessee, she's not a Gore fan. The question that she asks is, what is your view on the relationship between the PLO and Israel?
Well, I think that there's a tendency in American policy, and there has been for quite some time, to put too much stock both in the promises and the ability, I believe, of the PLO. I say in the promises because the record over the course of many years does not suggest that there is, in fact, a real and strong will for peace in Yasser Arafat and his PLO brethren. But, of course, that remains to be seen in terms of actions and things that are done. But on the other hand, there is an even more serious question. Because, as our founders recognized, if you read the Federalist Papers, they talk about what can lead to war amongst nations. And one of the things that can lead to war is the inability of a party to control the actions of those who are putatively on its side, so that they then act in ways that give cause and occasion to war. And one of the things that has always struck me about the PLO is, regardless of what might be the will of their leadership and so forth, they don't seem to have the ability to restrain all the various elements of the Arab world who are in various ways anxious and eager to attack Israel and to kill Israelis and to destroy Israeli assets. That has raised the question for me continually of whether or not the PLO is in fact a valid interlocutor for a peace process. Because in order to be a valid interlocutor, you must not only have a will to peace, you must be able to enforce the peace throughout the realm of those who are putatively on your side or under your influence. I don't think that the PLO has ever demonstrated an ability to exert that kind of control, which means what? Which means Israel sits down, makes concessions, does various things, and at the end of the day gets an agreement that even if there is a will to respect it on the PLO side, there is not the means to enforce it. That's why I've always thought it a little bit wishful thinking to believe that one can reach a secure and permanent peace in a situation where the interlocutors are so unequal as they are in the case of the PLO and Israel. What do I mean? Israel's a state, and the PLO is not. Does that mean I'm in favor of a Palestinian state? No, I'm in favor, though, of recognizing a reality, and I have been throughout. The division of the old Palestinian mandate resulted in two states. One that was given over to the Israelis, and the other that was given over to the Hashemite kings of Jordan, though it does not represent in that guise the majority of people who live under their rule. If we, in fact, were dealing with a situation where the state of Jordan and the state of Israel were sitting down to work out their differences over the West Bank and other things, you would at least have some assurance that on both sides there would be an ability to enforce a peace once made. For various reasons, American policy has never been willing to accept, look at, and pursue this reality. In a Keyes administration, we would.